It began quietly, like many neighborhood disputes do, with a subtle but unmistakable shift in behavior. The homeowner had lived in his suburban house for years, content with a wide concrete driveway that stretched from the street to his garage. It had always been his space, unchallenged and unquestioned. But then a new neighbor moved in, an older woman with sharp eyes and a sharper attitude. Within weeks of settling in, she began making comments, dropping hints that part of the driveway might not actually belong to him. At first, he dismissed it as idle chatter, the kind of baseless remark that entitled neighbors sometimes made. But soon, the comments turned into actions. The neighbor began parking closer and closer to the edge of his driveway, her tires creeping past the invisible boundary that separated the two properties. When asked to move, she brushed it off, claiming that the space was shared. Then came the lawn decorations. Potted plants and garden gnomes slowly arranged along the disputed strip of concrete, as if marking territory in some suburban land grab. The homeowner tried to remain calm, documenting each incident carefully. He photographed the encroachments, saved copies of passive-aggressive notes she slipped under his door, and kept track of her repeated claims that half the driveway was haze. To him, it was a nuisance, but also a pattern that felt increasingly calculated. She wasn't just encroaching, she was laying groundwork. Eventually, the situation escalated. The neighbor filed a formal complaint with the HOA, insisting that she had rights to a portion of the driveway. She claimed that her property lines extended further than the survey indicated, and that the homeowner had been hogging land that was rightfully haze. The HOA, as predictable as ever, didn't hesitate to get involved. Letters were sent, warnings were issued, and suddenly what had once been a quiet suburban street turned into a battlefield over concrete and inches of space. The homeowner, however, refused to be bullied. He retrieved his property deed, his original home inspection, and even tracked down the plat maps that clearly showed the driveway within his boundaries. Armed with evidence, he presented it to the HOA, only to be met with indifference. The board, swayed by the neighbors' persistence and loud complaints, claimed it wasn't their place to decide. Instead, they advised that the matter be taken to civil court. The neighbor was more than eager for that outcome. She strutted with confidence, telling anyone who would listen that she was about to win a legal victory. She spoke of taking back what was haze, and hinted that the homeowner would soon be paying her damages for years of trespass. It was arrogance at its peak, but it was clear she believed every word. For the homeowner, the decision to go to court wasn't easy. He knew it would be stressful, costly, and time-consuming. But he also knew it was necessary. This was no longer about a driveway. It was about protecting his property rights and standing up against an entitled bully who had pushed too far. And so, with evidence neatly compiled and a quiet determination building, he prepared for the legal battle that would soon unfold, one that neither he nor his neighbor could have predicted would end the way it did. When the court date finally arrived, the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. The entitled neighbor carried herself with smug certainty, convinced that the law would validate her claim. She had spent weeks bragging to other residents about her upcoming win, and many of them, tired of hearing about it, quietly hoped the matter would be resolved quickly. The homeowner, on the other hand, carried no arrogance, only a calm, steady determination to present the truth. The courtroom was modest but formal, with a judge presiding over a case that at first glance seemed trivial. But the stakes were anything but small. If the neighbor succeeded, she would gain not just a strip of driveway but also the leverage to demand financial compensation for years of encroachment. The homeowner stood to lose property value, peace of mind, and a piece of his home that he had rightfully purchased. The neighbor was the first to present her case. She spoke loudly, waving her arms, and leaned heavily on emotion. She painted herself as a victim, claiming she had been denied access to land that was hers by right. She showed photos of the driveway, carefully cropped to make it look as though the space was shared. She even produced handwritten notes of her own, filled with exaggerated accounts of supposed slights and years of unfair treatment. For a moment, it seemed convincing. The judge listened patiently, but without comment, while the neighbor filled the room with drama. Her confidence swelled with each word, as though she were already savoring her victory. Then came the homeowner's turn. He did not raise his voice, nor did he exaggerate. Instead, he presented cold, hard evidence. He handed over the official property deed, the plat maps, and the surveyor's report, all documents with legal weight. Each one showed, beyond doubt, that the entirety of the driveway fell within his property lines. He displayed photographs, not cropped or staged, but wide shots that left no room for ambiguity. He even included documentation of her encroachments, the parking, the decorations, the notes. The turning point came when his attorney introduced county land records that directly contradicted her claim. These were government-verified documents, impossible to dispute, and they confirmed that the neighbor had no legal right to any portion of the driveway. The judge's demeanor shifted noticeably at that moment. What had started as a he-said-she-said dispute was now cut-and-dry fact. The neighbor, however, didn't take it well. She interrupted, protested, and grew visibly agitated. Her once confident tone slipped into desperation as she tried to argue against the evidence. But the more she spoke, the clearer it became that her case was crumbling. The courtroom was no longer swayed by her theatrics. By the end of the session, the outcome was already obvious to everyone in attendance. The judge would need time to finalize a decision, but the writing was on the wall. The neighbor hadn't just lost ground. She had exposed herself to something far worse. Her reckless claims, paired with her refusal to respect property boundaries, had opened the door to consequences she never imagined. And those consequences would soon arrive, hitting harder than she could have ever prepared for. When the judgment was delivered, the courtroom was silent. The judge ruled unequivocally in the homeowner's favor. The driveway, as proven by the official records, belonged solely to him. Every argument the neighbor had made was dismissed as baseless. But it didn't stop there. The judge went further, reprimanding her for wasting the court's time with frivolous claims and filing a case without evidence. Her arrogance had backfired spectacularly. Not only was she denied any rights to the driveway, but she was also ordered to reimburse the homeowner for his legal fees. The figure was staggering compared to what she had hoped to gain, and it left her pale and trembling. What she had thought would be a triumph had instead turned into a financial disaster. Word of the ruling spread quickly through the neighborhood. For weeks, residents had endured her boasting, her endless declarations that she was about to put him in his place. Now, the truth was out, and the tone of the community shifted. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down were suddenly emboldened to whisper, gossip, and even chuckle at her expense. She had tried to take something that wasn't Hayes, and in doing so, she had destroyed her own reputation. But the fallout wasn't just social. With the court costs piling up, liens were placed against her property when she failed to pay promptly. Creditors circled, and the HOA, embarrassed by how she had dragged her name into the mess, distanced themselves entirely. No one rushed to her defense, and no one sympathized with her plight. The homeowner, meanwhile, regained his peace of mind. His driveway remained his, untouched and uncontested. He went about his days quietly, mowing his lawn, washing his car, and greeting neighbors who now saw him in a different light. He hadn't just defended his property, he had set an example of how to stand firm in the face of entitlement. For the neighbor, the humiliation only deepened. Where once she strutted with pride, she now avoided eye contact, scurrying indoors whenever she saw others outside. Her home, once adorned with decorative plants and self-claimed markers, now sat barren, stripped of the symbols of her failed claim. And eventually, unable to handle the financial weight and the social stigma, she put her house up for sale. The move was quiet, almost secretive, but the neighborhood noticed. When the for sale sign appeared on her lawn, the message was clear. She had lost everything. What began as an attempt to claim a strip of concrete had spiraled into a complete unraveling of her standing, her finances, and her place in the community. The driveway remained exactly where it had always been, belonging entirely to its rightful owner. But for the neighbor, the battle had left a permanent scar, a reminder that entitlement, arrogance, and greed often carry the highest costs. And so, the homeowner's story ended not with a stain of conflict, but with quiet victory, while the entitled neighbor's downfall served as a cautionary tale for anyone who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. Do like for hype, please.